The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on Chaos2Cured podcast are the speaker's own. All discussion is based on our own experiences. We do not and cannot guarantee the accuracy or completeness of any information. Chaos2Cured podcast cannot give medical or health advice. All discussion is based upon our personal experiences and meant for general and educational purposes. This podcast is not a substitute for professional help or for diagnostic purposes for yourself or another. Chaos2Cured podcast always encourages you to consult an appropriate professional. Chaos2Cured podcast is here to explain our perspective of the human experience. We hope it leads to questions, learning, wisdom, and knowledge. Welcome to Chaos2Cured podcast. So today, my wonderful co-host is here with me, Jeffrey Freed, and we're going to talk about how society responds to us when we come out and tell the world in scientific terms that we are not a neurotypical individual. So, Jeffrey, this is a wonderful subject. Is there something that you had mentioned it? Do you want to start this off, or I can?
Yeah, I'll start it off. I work primarily with people on the spectrum. That's what I've been doing for, at this point, 40, dare I say it, 40 years. And they weren't considered on the spectrum when I started. Everyone had ADD or minimal brain something syndrome. It was the precursor to ADD. And I was the person in the Denver area to send your kid or teenager to help them, because they all had visual or kinesthetic learning styles. As my career, I guess the word is matured, what I started getting is less ADD, some bipolar people, but also a huge amount of people that were diagnosed as being on the spectrum. And it was a secret that you couldn't tell anyone. I didn't even dare tell the parents sometimes. I navigated around the diagnosis and I said, well, they have Asperger's, or they have autistic tendencies, but they're not really fully autistic. And then the parent would get it. Even saying that, which is really milquetoast, the parent would get upset and want to basically deny it. They would say all kinds of reasons that their child wasn't on the spectrum. And most of them were. In the last 10 years or so, being autistic is not considered quite as horrible as it was 10 or 15, 20 years ago, but it's still a huge stigma. People think that people on the spectrum are a lot like Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man. They visualize the people on the spectrum as having ritualistic behavior, not looking anyone in the eyes, staring down at the floor, basically drooling and absolutely and totally disconnected. And that's so not fair. The realization is that people who are diagnosed with autism or suspect they have it are now basically proud of it, because there's so many good things about autism that, especially, I mean, if you're a low functioning person on the spectrum, yeah, you've got huge issues. But if you're middle or high functioning, you will have a whole array of talents that need to be figured out and exploited. And if you can figure them out, you can be enormously successful. However, you can't really announce it until you've arrived. If you, for example, are going for a job and you say, well, to the interviewer, I'm kind of neurotypical, I'm a little autistic, you won't get the job, because people perceive you as so mentally challenged that you won't be able to do the work. And the real thing they worry about is you're not going to be able to socialize. Everybody on the spectrum, they think, can't socialize. They're socially awkward. And that's really sad. Um, many people on the spectrum do have social issues, but you can figure out and navigate ways to communicate. They're just more your style. And knowing, that you are somewhat autistic, you can use those characteristics that are so positive to cover up the weaknesses or the perceived weaknesses, and you can be very social, and you can hide and mask it. And that's also a shame too, because you shouldn't have
That you
to.
have to.
Yeah, you shouldn't have
Yeah.
to.
Oh, well, it's the misperception that people have is detrimental in a lot of ways, and it is shaming, and it casts a stigma on a lot of things that don't need it and don't deserve it. I know with what you had mentioned with Rain Man, I know that's a very common misconception and jumped on very quickly by the general population if they're not familiar with it. And I think people deserve to kind of understand, that full spectrum. There's a reason why they changed that word and said, you're on the spectrum, because, the degree of difference is honestly, I don't even know how big you'd say.
Yeah,
But, very few are really on that low end
well,
that you'd mentioned.
not really very few, but they're the ones that really don't go out in public. Many times they are still either institutionalized or live in the parents' basement or brother or sister's basement, where they have menial jobs. Um, and, it's not a small percentage. It really isn't. It's probably maybe a quarter to a third of people on the
So
spectrum.
that's a big percentage, and again, that's a misperception again. And is that because it's just not seen, or is it even worse that it's because we don't talk about it?
We don't talk about it.
Yeah.
It's considered a social stigma to have a child or an uncle or somebody who is living in their basement and does ritualistic things. Can't hold
Yeah.
it, can't have a conversation, because I guess the core of that is that people think that it's a shame, and that they think that genetically, which is kind of true, genetically you're carrying that gene for autism, and you need to be looked at or treated differently because of that. It's shaming. That's the perfect word for what goes on. And the interesting thing is, you got a quarter, 30% of people that are on the spectrum that are, essentially so sensitive to everything that they really have trouble in society or just even going outside. They
Yeah.
all have talents, but their difficulties outweigh their talents. But that leaves 70%, which is more obviously than 30%, who have a lot of special gifts and weaknesses, but they're not all savants either. The character Dustin Hoffman played in Rain Man was a savant, and I've read stuff that says about 10 to 15% of people on the spectrum have savant abilities. I do suspect it's higher, but it's not. Their strengths aren't high enough or strong enough to be classified as savantic. Um,
Yes.
these
Yeah.
are the people that can do math in their head, who can read a 500-page book in an hour.
I was
Um,
thinking of the person who they made a movie off of him. I think it was, I'm not sure, don't quote me on the movie, The Shine, but he was able to hear a piece and play it on the piano. It
yeah,
won a whole bunch of awards. But that is definitely not common. You know, you brought up you mentioned having to bring this up at work and how you wouldn't get the job, and that's something that unfortunately is very common with all of the mental health issues that individuals or differences that people have.
Yep.
I mean, even if you say mental, if you start the sentence with mental health, the last word is very, very difficult to even come up with where it's positive. Really, there's just differences, or even the word itself. There's so much stigma and
Shame.
it's frustrating, and shame. So especially when you with bipolar or with borderline personality or schizophrenia, as soon as you mention certain ones, there are instant feelings people have. And a lot of them come from the misperceptions and actually incorrect assessments or knowledge about said issues, or said diagnosis, I guess, trying to stay neutral with those. If somebody has schizophrenia, people think immediately of violence or of, same thing with bipolar, very common, or they think of, gambling a lot or crashes into depression. It's sad to see that, people do have those perceptions, and it's definitely not something I would say flat out in an interview. I think one of the things is it's sad that we can't be ourselves or be proud of what we've overcome. But even though I see myself as not having those things because they're dealt with, right? If you got like strep throat and you took penicillin and it was gone, you don't walk around saying I have strep throat to everyone for the rest of your life.
That's a good analogy.
Right?
That's a really good analogy. I love it.
That to me is something that bothers me when people take care of, say, something like, depression, and they get over it. They still walk around saying, oh, I'm depressed. Or if somebody has bipolar, it's on our medical sheet. Every person that reads it, they just assume you're still at stage 1. There's no progress that's been made. So for me, I see myself as I don't have those things. Medically, they're on my chart. I take medication for them. I manage myself and my moods, but I don't see that as something that holds me back. Now, I would love to be able to share that, but realistically, if I tell a new employer that I have this and this and this diagnosis, OCD, ADHD, generalized anxiety, no one wants to deal with that. Their perceptions are going to be, this person's going to take a lot of effort. They're going to cost us a lot of money on insurance. They're not going to show up for work. They're going to maybe be lazy. A lot of people would immediately assume, because of bipolar, drugs. So I'd probably get drug tested. It's sad that we even have to have that discussion, but I think it's important. What are some things that, and have you advised some people on how they should approach an employer?
Yeah, I have.
Sorry for my tirade, by the way. I just kind of went on a rant. This is a great topic, so please, jump in.
Yeah, one of the things that is very true about work, and it's one of the reasons why so many people aren't productive at work, or so many workplaces aren't productive, is people want to be around people they can relate. They want to be able to goof around, go out and have a drink, have lunch with. It's way more important to companies than productivity. Whole culture is, I love, you've got to be a regular person, and you got to be able to joke around, take a joke. And if you have a diagnosis of something, they just assume you're not going to fit in. You may be very productive, and every single anecdote I hear is that autistic people are incredibly productive. that they take the work seriously, they focus very well, but a lot of them don't like that socialization as much. They're there to do a job, and that's not as important to a lot of work environments as being able to get along and be a regular guy or gal at work. And that's what would stymie a potential employer. They'll think, well, there's so many things about autism or bipolar disorder. They're liable to get offended to eat too quickly. They're liable to get very sad and cry and embarrass everybody. I don't want to deal with that. So what I tell people who I work with is to basically just say, and this is all true, there's nothing I've told them to do that is a lie. One of my specialties I would teach them to say is that I focus really, really well. I work really, really hard, even when I'm sick, as long as it's not contagious. I'll work at home, because so many people on the spectrum are so loyal and literal. And that can really make you a wonderfully productive employee. I would also say there are polite ways, if you don't feel like socializing, to get out of it, to go maybe have a drink after work, but keep it short. Don't look to prolong the social engagements, and just basically be serious about work. Try to keep your work completely divorced from your social life. And that's hard. What I basically find, and this is true of me, and so many people that I know on the spectrum have said to me, I don't really like small talk and I don't like gossip. It's kind of mean and unproductive. And if you don't like those two things, it's probably going to be hard for you to work in a typical office environment. However, there are companies that are started by autistic people, and they're like Microsoft comes to mind, Virgin Atlantic comes to mind, Apple comes to mind,
Google.
where Google, but they're just interested, that the company is interested in productivity, and they hire brilliant dyslexics and autistics because all the evidence suggests that these people are entrepreneurial. Many of them are entrepreneurial geniuses and will work hard, will miss sleep to complete a deadline, but they're not good socializing. But they don't care about that in these environments.
Yeah.
Actually, they can tend to recruit people on the spectrum. A good thing to say to someone who is autistic and thinking about working, try to work on the internet or for yourself. That's a big one. If you can't, then don't tell anybody. I mean, seriously, that's so sad. I recoil saying it. Don't tell anyone that you're on the spectrum. And, just basically minimize the stuff that you find irritating, work hard, learn how to do some small talk. And if you don't know how to do it, then what you do is you listen to, this is what I did. I listened to people make small talk, and I did it a little bit, and then I became very proficient at it. It's a learned skill. Neurotypical people just know it. Small talk is their way of introducing themselves and, sort of soothing the situation. And they like small talk. They find it to be gratifying. So many. Go ahead.
I honestly, the small talk, it just drives me a little crazy. I have a hard time even understanding, in a lot of ways, everything from, let me restart this. What I would say is, for me, small talk, I want to understand why people like it. I want to understand why people are fascinated with, say, someone that's famous or someone that has, a record album. What makes it different? The truth is that nothing makes them different. It's not something that is different about them. They're great at one particular skill, something that people look up to. But for me, I don't like that kind of talk. So I find that interesting. I want to jump back to what you said before, where you said that for them, you needed to have, you know, for, I'm right now, I'm totally distracted. I apologize. So this is something for people to understand too. There's nothing wrong with getting distracted, and there's going to be distractions in your life. And when you lose track of what you're thinking about or what you're talking about, tell the people you're around. There's nothing wrong with it. And so when I just lost my train of thought, there's nothing wrong. A lot of times I'll ramble too long on before I just admit it. But I've learned that by doing that, the whole room understands. If you're in a business meeting, no one cares. You can always get back on track. And there's nothing wrong with saying, listen, I'm sorry, I just totally lost track. It's common with myself, as everyone just heard. And there's no shame in it. That's exactly one of the things that we're talking about. So I do want to say, I hope everyone paid attention when you said that your advice was to focus on nothing that was untrue. And all of those things are strengths. I love that fact. Like for the loyalty was super important and extremely helpful. I mean, out of everything that you could focus on, why wouldn't you want a loyal employee? The hard work. A lot of the individuals I've been lucky enough to work with that are on the spectrum are amazingly hardworking. Not only do they give it their all, but they want to do the best that they can. And that is something you don't always see. That's such a wonderful strength.
You have this era right now that we're calling it quietly quitting, where people can't quit, but they don't put much energy and enthusiasm into their job because they're not being paid well enough. They don't feel that they're appreciated. So many non-neurotypical people don't think that. They're very literal. They're being paid, excuse me, they're being paid to do a job, so they do it. And you don't see that amongst neurotypical people as much. Again, it's that literalness. Can be so engaging and makes them so productive. You're paying them a wage. They're going to give you, in most cases, everything they've got. And they're the ones that you should be seeking out to hire, not avoid.
Exactly. Well, and the creativity, which happens to coincide so often with things like OCD or ADHD, schizophrenia, bipolar. I mean, you just go down the list, and so many of those individuals have vivid imaginations. The creativity is high. The innovation, the ability to think. I don't like the term thinking outside of the box. I like it more that they don't even think in linear steps. One the good description that I tried to give to someone because they were asking about my eldest niece. Oftentimes people will like get bored of her talking, and what happens is they want her to kind of finish, and so she talks like faster and faster, and they didn't never give her quite enough time to finish. And what I find fascinating, and she's diagnosed with autism, and what she does is she actually is telling like bits of a story. She's assuming that my knowledge is vast enough that I can fill in those holes. It's fascinating. So she'll actually give me this really detailed, fully descript, story. And it might be slightly disjoint if somebody doesn't listen to it and they're not fully aware of maybe some of the things she's talking about. But it does make one cohesive thought. It's really fascinating. And so I think patience is one thing that a lot of people just in general need to learn. It's one of the things that's frustrating when, people are dealing with medication. This is a totally different topic, but when you're in a workplace and you're on medications that might sedate you, sometimes it's really frustrating when you're trying to speak and it's taking a little longer, or your hands are shaking. That's something I dealt with. You're sitting there giving a speech or having to present something and your hands are tremoring. It's terrifying, and it's something you can't control. But again, it brings us back to the whole point. Like, why is that a bad thing? No one would ever judge somebody for needing to rest on their cane because their hip hurt. But if our hands are shaking because we're taking a medication that helps us manage and control something that we never deal with anymore, or maybe we deal with on a daily basis, but it never controls us anymore. It doesn't rule us. And it's sad that we have to have even discussions like that, which is one reason why this podcast exists and why I wanted you to be able to speak about some of these things. As we kind of roll towards, this particular topic, are there things that you see that society can do, or people just in a family or friends? There's things that I'll jump into later, but I'd like for you to start, that you see that people could do to maybe help mitigate some of the shame that we feel. What are some things? Yeah.
Yeah, let me give you an example of that. And I was thinking this the whole time you were talking. People who are autistic or any of those other conditions that we talked about, almost all of them think in images. And when you think in images, and if you're real visual spatialists, so many people on the spectrum are, their thoughts, if you could crawl inside their head, you wouldn't be hearing much, you'd be seeing everything. And it's more translation. If they have to communicate with someone, they have to take their thoughts, which are visual, and they have to turn them to words. They have to sequence their thoughts. So it's a lot more processing for them than it is for the neurotypical person who thinks mostly in words, but words and pictures. So we are handicapped if we are non-neurotypical when it comes to words, but only if we have to spit it out fast. If we're allowed proper processing time, we're probably even better at communicating our thoughts because of the variety of things that we pick up that neurotypicals don't pick up. We tend to be whole picture thinkers. We see the whole thing, and we don't arrive at conclusions by sequencing one point after another. That's linear sequential processing. And there's plenty of places that's very valuable. But many times we see the forest before we see the tree. And what would be great is if we could harness that and have visual spatial people, maybe people on the spectrum, come up with the large ideas, and the neurotypical people fill in the details later. They've been talking about that since the 1970s, but nobody ever did it. But what a person can do if they are visual is they can say, you can say this in a meeting, hey, I'm a visual thinker. In order for me to make really good conclusions, I need a little bit more processing time to turn my images into the right words. If you express it that way in a business meeting or in an interview, I think the person interviewing or listening to you would be awed. Number one, that you know about stuff like that. Number two, that you know yourself and how you process. And number three, that you can articulate it to others. So that's kind of what I would say if I were in an interview. I would say, hey, just heads up, I think mostly in images. I'm a visual spatial processor. So you might allow me a little bit more processing time, and I'll give you a great answer. Speed of retrieval is not necessarily my thing, but I can do it and maybe do it better than other people. Just give me a little extra time. That puts a positive spin on it. There's no way you go wrong if you can explain it that way. That's a
No,
that's a good
that's
thought.
I love that. Well, and it's such an important thing to be able to, really what I have found whenever I'm looking to work with other people, or if you're going to hire someone or work with a team, you're always looking for people to with the ability to communicate clearly. And for me, communicating clearly is being able to say, what someone needs. Oftentimes I'm very bad about that. I'm still learning what things I do need. Even like what things are fun. I don't have a lot of perception. I have some weaknesses, and some gaps. But because I have some of those gaps, and I'm trying to fill them, I always try to communicate clearly. I loved what you said in a meeting. It's a great way to say, listen, this is how I function. A lot of times it's nice to say, listen, please bear with me. If I go off on a tangent, I'll get back to the point. Will you give me a little extra time? If someone knows how someone else functions, it's one, you kind of show that you know how to communicate with others, which is a main key point that someone's looking for. It also, the point you mentioned that I like the best is it shows that you have self-awareness, and I think that's kind of key. So for mentioning it to employers, I know for myself, I look at it as it's not anyone's business because I have it managed. I take good care of myself. I work really hard. So the only reason I ever need to tell anyone, what my medical history is truly if I want to share it. So for me, with friends or if I meet new people, the first thing I don't jump to is what I've been diagnosed with. And I think that a lot of, no, well, and I think for a long time I felt pressure like I should, like I needed to like protect others from my diagnosis. Right. So like I would go out on dates and I'd say, listen, I have this. And it'd be the first thing I'd bring up, which didn't make a lot of sense. It was almost like I was so ashamed that I had it. It was like I had to tell them, so they wouldn't risk, taking a chance on me. It's like I was, I had the plague. Once
You
I
didn't get a
realized,
lot of second dates, though.
no, of course not. It was, when you come into any relationship feeling ashamed, that's what you get back because you don't see your own value. And I didn't for the longest time. And it was a struggle to kind of understand that just because I've had this, you can look at it two ways. Yeah, you've been cursed with all of these problems, or two, the way I've chosen to look at it is I've been able to overcome all of these things. That makes me special. It doesn't detract. And so I would love for us, to talk a little bit about, reframing it, because we talked about like misperceptions and, how people see this stuff. And I think for people to really understand, me, for myself, when people talk about bipolar, they get fearful. What are some things, and you and I have never actually talked about this. So like when you hear the word bipolar and you've dealt with people that are, what are the things that come to mind?
Explosiveness, emotionality, start to cry. The person might start to cry. So what you're afraid they're going to do is slip out of the niche of the way people are supposed to act in social situations, which is really exhausting. It's like it's assumed in a workplace that you have to project being normal and even-tempered, and laugh at appropriate times and don't laugh at others. And for neurotypical people, I think it's just natural. For non-neurotypical people, like someone with bipolar disorder, they are afraid you're going to stick out, do things that they can't control, such as starting crying or becoming
shouting.
Yeah, losing control. And the media doesn't help, because every time there is these horrific events like mass killings or homicides, and they mention something like bipolar or have mental disorder, and that's happening so much now that people have become even more afraid, irrationally afraid, that you're going to bring a gun to a meeting, or or just start screaming and yelling. And let's not kid ourselves. If you are unmedicated bipolar, that's probably what you'll do, is you'll be emotional and reactive. But if you're handling it, if you've accepted it and you've tried to take medications and supplements that even you out, you're no more likely to do that than anybody else. The thing that you said that I liked is people who are bipolar can live incredibly happy lives, even tempered lives. The medications are much better than they used to be. They don't make you a zombie anymore. And the only problem occurs, in my opinion, is when a person, and I wish people wouldn't do this, a person with bipolar disorder stops taking their meds. And that's what they're afraid of. They're afraid that, number one, you don't recognize that you're bipolar. Number two, you're not taking medications. And they're afraid of that. And that's one more thing they have to deal with that makes life and work hard. So they will get rid of you. They'll expel you because they don't want to deal with it. It just is another complicating factor. So again, I wouldn't reveal it until they accepted me and I was part of the work milieu. And then if it came out and I felt like talking about it, I would. But unfortunately, in this current environment, you can't be honest about that stuff. It's sad, but true.
Well, and I would absolutely agree. It's you need time. So, before I would ever tell anyone, I want them to see, at least, years of stability. Like, you need them to see that. And, it's something that you and I've already talked about, but, I'll bring it up now, because it'll be a show that we can do later on. But the living a life where I have to be judged on a hyper scale in terms of mood. So for me, my mood has to be always happy, 100%. If I'm sad at all, there's a risk of, instantaneous thought of depression, suicide, office meds. The level of proof, the burden of proof people have to have when other people know. And this is after that it's already been proven that they are, they're well, they're managing what they're dealing with flawlessly. They've been stable for years. Even then, just one day, a single burst of temper, a single moment of being frustrated in traffic, and there's instantaneous doubt about an individual. That is something that is very hard to deal with. And another reason that for me, I keep it close to my vest, and I'm happy to share when somebody asks me about it when it comes to business, personal, relationships and things like that. I don't lead with it. I wait for, people to see who I am. And then anybody who judges me for anything outside of what I show them and the person I am, they're not worth it anyway. Is kind of how I look at it. And these kind of discussions, lead to, I think, people feeling, normal, and it's okay to be different. And this society is not easy to live in when you aren't designed specifically for, a cubicle and the way we all work, it's just a different world. It's tricky.
But it's getting better, Kirk. It's getting
Yeah.
better. You have people, identifying as trans. You have people who were black or you're brown, um, doing things and acting ways that they wouldn't have done or been allowed to do 20 or 30 years ago. You have gay people who are proud of being gay. Diversity is a good thing because you don't have to repress yourself all the time. So it's definite in ways people dress too. They dress the way in a colorful way. It's less repressed of a culture than it used to be. So there's more allowance for diversity. Now, that's not true in all strata of the work world or the world, but it is true more and more. And I don't see that. I see it as getting better, not worse.
Do you think, and the when you think of, I agree with you. When you think of emotions, do you think the same amount of diversity is allowed when it comes to emotions?
Yeah, it's
For
getting
me,
better.
you
It's
think
getting
it's getting
better.
better?
I do.
Like,
I'll tell you
yeah,
why.
okay.
It starts with social media. Spend some time scrolling through TikTok or Instagram. It is now the norm to be, and a little bit cool to be outside the box. And it's infiltrating our culture. And I think that's a good thing. Yeah, it can be outrageous, but it's all action reaction. People were so repressed for so long and afraid to be themselves. So that when the pendulum starts swinging the other way, there's definitely an overreaction. And people now just I guess they sort of wallow in their differentness and explore it. And they're less repressed.
Which
Someone
is
could argue,
good.
yeah, somebody could
I,
argue that, but that's what I think.
well, and I guess where my question comes from is does that, and this could be an entire show on its own. Um, when you talk about a spectrum in terms of intellect, when you talk about a spectrum in terms of emotions, I feel like emotions are capped on both ends.
Okay,
Um,
what do you mean by that?
so you have, let's say we have like an X line, so a linear line, and you have 0 is our starting point. We have 10 points to the negative side, 10 points to the positive. And let's say you have happiness, or just a stable person, completely calm, not feeling elation or depression at 0. As you move towards the right, towards happy, it gets capped. Like it's at 4 or 5. If you go beyond that, if you giggle for too long or you get too excited, society sees that as a negative, and instantaneously it's bad. Same thing on the downside. You can get sad, but you start breaking down again. There's a cap on emotions.
You explained it. Yeah, that's good.
So I mean, for that's what I was asking. Is I see the diversity in terms of acceptance, and I see people struggling to live like as they are, but I still feel that same repression emotionally, and it's hard. I want more. I guess I want to be able to say exactly what I think, not to offend people. That's not, there's a difference between politically, being just, rude and saying whatever you want. I want to be myself when I speak. And I do still feel pressure to be different or to fit into different molds.
Well, that's accurate. I do see it as getting a little better, but the key word there is little, not a lot, because there's still a certain amount of conformity that's expected. If you're an artist, for example, you're supposed to dress funny, in an interesting fashion. You've got to have your house. You can't have a conservative looking house. Um, if you're a comedian, you're expected to be goofy all the time and have outrageous things in your life. the way you dress, the way you design your house, the car you drive. And it's part of the social contract. The social contract is, if you want to fit in, you have to learn how to be a very good actor or actress. And people with mental, I guess the word is differences, tend not to be good at that. And I know this is my specialty, working with people on the spectrum. I know virtually everyone on the spectrum doesn't like that. They find it to be tiring and pointless. And I imagine, even though I'm not a neurotypical, but I imagine neurotypical people like conformity, and that's still there. It's less, but it's still there. And there's even conformity when someone is, thinking differently, like the example I gave about if you're an artist, if you're a teacher, there's certain things, certain ways that you have to act. And it's expected. And if you walk outside that strata, what ends up happening is people think that you're crazy and they assume you're hiding even more. And then it's liable to come out and outrage them and everyone else. So, yeah, it's a social contract. You have to conform in order to get along.
Well, it's one of those things. I do feel like we are making progress, and that's what everybody should pick up. And from listening too, I think one of the most important things is to never feel hopeless. Always remember, just being different and trying to fit in and work with a world that is maybe not perfectly suited for us. It's not a bad thing. Swimming with the stream is not bad.
No,
Working with the system is a good thing. It's helpful. And speaking as somebody who always swam against the stream and always fought it, it's tiring. So a lot of times there's nothing wrong with utilizing a system that's in place to the best benefit. Before we close off the show, is there anything you wanted to add? I loved everything you said. I really hope it helps a lot of people and they understand some of the issues that still exist. So there's something you want to close with?
I want to add. It's like 10, 15, 20 years ago, if a person went out to eat or to a game or to the theater by themselves, they were considered to be really weird and dangerous. Now everybody does it, and a lot of people do it. No, there's a lot less shaming about that. It's accepted now, and there's a sign that things are changing.
That's wonderful. What a great way to end the show. There's always room as long as we're willing to listen. And so everyone, thank you so much for listening. Please feel free to ask us about specifics from any show. Reach out to us, and we'll have show notes and ways to reach out and directly contact us if need be too. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great week, and we wish you well. Thank you so much for listening to Chaos2Cured podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with everyone you know, and definitely like, follow, and subscribe. Certainly leave a comment if you'd like. Let us know what you'd like us to talk about the next time. Also, in our show notes, there should be direct links where you can follow us on our social media, as well as reach out to us directly. Thanks again, and have a great day.